Right, there we are. We're on. Nathan Kinch, welcome to the Luke Farr Show, a show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. And I thought I'd just hit record there, mate, because we were talking off camera and there was going to be some really healthy stuff. But I guess the premise was we were talking about injuries and the mental mind state around injuries when one has physically healed, but the biggest challenge being the mindset towards it all. But you were about to say some great stuff, so I'll leave the floor to you, mate. Let's go.
Mate, thanks for having me back on. It's good to see you. The beard is looking very snazzy.
It's gone, isn't it?
Yeah.
Slightly.
Well,
yeah.
no, I would say that is. See, I'm jealous because I don't have a very full beard. So I think it's looking great.
Far better than last time. Yeah, I looked like a caveman last time.
Well, that's okay. If you're from the inner north in Melbourne, where I'm at, that's a pretty popular look. So I was going to say that, and there's a lot of places that we could take something like that, particularly things like neuroplastic pain, and but what I was going to say is, so we have this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder, and then there are ideas of sort of like post-traumatic growth. And I think that trauma is probably not particularly well understood by in like a colloquial sense, right? My understanding, recognizing I'm not an expert, this is not my sort of field or discipline, but for various different reasons, mostly personal originally, and then have become more professional over time, I've studied it a little bit. And my understanding is that trauma is something like the way that the organism responds to, like the human organism responds to difficult events or circumstances. So the way that it plays out is something like this, right? So let's say, and I'm just going to paint a really simple picture, and it's not going to be it's not going to be directly relevant to the leg, right? But so let's say you're a kid and you're in an environment at home where one of your parents is like either really emotionally or even physically abusive. And unfortunately, there are lots of kids that grow up in environments like that. Now, the healthy sort of response to that would be to kind of like lash out to protect yourself, etc. We have all of these different faculties to motivate action, like emotion that moves us, that motivates action. But when you're 5 and you've got a man that's potentially able to hurt you, like a grown man that's potentially able to hurt you, it's much safer. And the organism sort of does, there's an automaticity to this. The organism sort of does this, right, almost by itself, if you will, as in it's not like a conscious process that a 5-year-old goes through. And then they repress. So they sort of come into themselves. They lock away that anger and all the different types of, again, what would genuinely be healthy sort of like adaptive emotional responses, because it's more dangerous to be authentic. And then over time, that can become patterned. And eventually that can become maladaptive, right? Because you are repressing these really important emotional faculties, and that can have so many different consequences elsewhere in life. And so that kind of like response to, at the level of the organism, response to the difficult event or circumstances, which probably starts off being adaptive, eventually becomes maladaptive. And that sort of like process is the trauma. So, because a lot of people think the event itself is trauma. Now, the event itself can be deeply sort of traumatic, incredibly difficult, horrible, horrific, yada, all of that stuff, right? And but again, so trauma is kind of like the process. That's my understanding of it. But I think colloquially, a lot of people think the event equals the trauma, but actually it's the process of response. And how that goes through, from being maybe adaptive upfront through to being deeply maladaptive in all of these different ways. But yeah, but the thing that I was thinking of when you said that, and you pointed out this idea of you've been forcibly slowed down, and it's kind of taught you patience and presence, or present awareness. So you're making coffee more mindfully than you used to, because you've been forced to slow down. And the thing that came to mind when you said that is we see all of these different instances of, like, again, what is sometimes referred to as post-traumatic growth.
But
So
you've said forced to slow down, but you're forced to slow down, but you technically are slowed down. You know what I mean? Like, yeah,
yeah,
your movements are slower by default of the injury.
totally.
And then it's in sync with your brain having to slow down.
Yeah, and you like your cognitive faculties, your mind, if you will, has to find a way to adapt to the the biological realities of your body at a given point in time. But I think that, don't get me wrong, like there are lots of different ways in which difficult circumstances can put us on like a really negative trajectory, and we can get stuck in sort of like a pain fear cycle, or all these different kind of like feedback loops that just keep making things worse. But the inverse can also be true under different circumstances, and if we try and approach it in various different ways, which is kind of quite exciting and empowering.
So why do we find it, Nathan, sorry to interrupt you, so why do we find it so challenging to slow down when we're physically not impaired, and that we all only seek to slow down when we're physically impaired? So therefore there is a physical lack of movement and a slowing of our general normal pace, or that contrary. So it's like, why? And that, that ties in quite nicely into how we need to meditate to slow our brain down. But why is it such a challenge for a normal physical able human to slow down mentally and be so present in the moment?
You know what? I think it's massively cultural, mate. So there are different folks in you're in NZ, I'm in Australia. Obviously lots of cultural nuances, but like there's enough commonality there that we can kind of say, we're kind of in a similar sort of cultural context. We've embraced the Industrial Revolution in various different ways. We've kind of, got...
You guys technically are just convicts from UK, and we're just the nicer bunch. They didn't kind of
I'm first generation, come on.
Sorry to just interlude there as well. But sorry, and we embraced our natives as well, rather than just kicking them up the
look, there is
some significant differences between New Zealand and Australia.
Totally, in terms of First Nations peoples.
Correct.
Really, really significant. Maybe people tuning in from different parts of the world don't know how significant those differences are.
We can quickly unpack those if you like. I think it would be great. A great small education part.
Well, okay, so let's do that, because it's maybe in some ways, it's very likely in some ways more not necessarily wanting to create a value hierarchy there, but it's definitely important. But actually, present awareness and knowing when to go slow, knowing when to go fast, these things are super important as well. Different cultural context.
Should we finish unpacking that before we jump into First Nations top discussion, because that could be quite elongated.
And also I would want to be very careful about how I approach that, because I cannot ever speak on behalf of our First Nations peoples or anything like that. So
and I too here with the Maldives for sure. I wouldn't know how to properly articulate that.
And maybe even in the show notes, it might be worth pointing folks to some really good First Nations resources. First Nations resources by First Nations peoples. So different parts of the world, right, that have had a different sort of developmental trajectory, different relation to different stories, ideologies, dogmas, etc. They don't necessarily have quite the same challenges that we have with this always on needing to be more productive type of mindset. And a lot of again, this is really hard, because like the causal chain here is so complex and multifactorial, it's crazy, right? But like let's just take one example. It's a pretty powerful one, and actually both of our nation states are doing interesting work to try and overcome this in terms of well-being economy and stuff. But so let's say you take gross domestic product, which was never intended to be used the way that it is right now. And its creator was very clear about that, very explicit. It was a measure for a specific purpose, and its purpose of use has been massively extended, and I think harmfully so. So gross domestic product basically tells us in financial terms the value, that like the sum total of what a nation has produced in a given cycle, let's say 12 months. But that doesn't tell us a lot of stuff that's really important, like how well supported are young mums? You know, like, are the elderly actually respected? Are their voices still being heard? Is there space and place for them to pass down wisdom to those young?
How do you measure that though?
First of all,
Well, like,
we're obsessed with measure
around are the elderly respected, right? So yeah.
Well, like, look, I could come up with lots.
Get society-based metrics on that, which is quite fascinating, isn't it?
Well, first of all measurement is approximation, right? And we could come up with useful approximations for that, right? If we were thoughtful about it. And a lot of folks that work in the area that is sometimes broadly, it's very trans or interdisciplinary, called wellbeing economy, are doing that type of stuff, right? So that we can give meaningful visibility to a lot of stuff that truly matters, that we ought to deeply value, and that really, when we sit with it, we do deeply value, so that we can give meaningful visibility to that stuff and internalize it. You like bring it within economy, because at the moment, a slightly different example. So a tree to our economy is worth whatever the lumber is worth. But if we were to do true value accounting or true cost accounting, the ecosystem services of one mature gum tree here in a mature forest in the state of Victoria, if we were actually to try and financialize that, the tree would be worth millions of dollars, right? Because it is such a complex process, and it contributes to so many other complex ecological processes, you know, that exist in this dynamical sort of ecological balance that brings, you know, health, vitality, and possibility to the ecology. You know, so those are sort of examples. So if we, but then, so where do we get to with this? Well, it's like, all right, well, you're only really valued in now, recognizing it's a narrow sense of value, but we very much internalize this, and it's become part of our identity and all this different type of stuff. You're only valued if you are contributing to economy using the narrow goal orientation that we currently have. So if you're going to work, you're earning more money year on year or whatever, you're valued, right? And that gives, you know, that can sort of like amplify other sort of ideological stances around, you know, productivity, or even just the purpose of how you spend your time, or the way that we think of time management, and yada yada yada. You know, so those are some sprinklings to throw into the mix.
There's a lot to unpack there, especially about the value chain. I was trying to think of an analogy between human and, like you said, a tree, right? But were you breaking that down as the value of the tree, which you stipulated this is worth millions based on everything and everyone involved in the process after it's been cut down?
No, God, no.
No.
Keeping it as it is.
Right.
So,
not moving into the.
Oh God, no.
Not into the material world and that being used, and then the resources of a human coming into. No. Okay.
Not in terms of like us using that as part of some material throughput process. The value of the tree as is, as an ecological process,
right?
It'd be worth millions. But, and there are people trying to do this work. It's very hard to do. Because,
I guess the question is, how are you quantifying it as millions, and where are you getting that figure, an actual sum figure on?
Well, I'm not giving a concrete figure here, because the ranges that have been proposed by people attempting to do this work are pretty significant.
Right.
Some people have suggested billion, right. But it's like, I think, and it's because
how are they? What's the process in getting to that sum? So you off the cuff literally just threw out it's worth potentially millions,
Yeah.
rather than saying thousands. So that's an
Mhm.
interesting thing to
Yeah.
unpack. Be like,
So-
why is that tree not worth thousands? Why is it worth millions?
Yeah. So again, not a concrete figure, but
Sure.
I stick with that kind of range, right? So let's say you take a mature tree, it's 100 odd years old or whatever. It is so it is so deeply embedded within ecology, and it's contributing to millions upon millions of kind of like micro ecological processes, like every day, right?
Mm.
Those ecological processes are what we rely on for life.
Mm.
Like the tree does all of, you know, it obviously does photosynthesis and yada yada yada, which is wholly, like, as an evolutionary, like, just amazing, right? It also does carbon sequestration, you know, it oxygenates, like it's literally creating the possibility of complex mammalian and other forms of life. So the folks that have done this type of work, or rather are, because it's an ongoing process, attempting to do this type of work, are trying to look at like the nth order effects of the tree's like sort of living contribution to ecology. And they're trying to put, you know, dollars and cents, and I mean sort of like cents, not as you know 10 cents, but like cents, dollars and cents to that process, and trying to make the case. And we know this. So like, you know, the Amazon's almost fucked completely, which is so scary. And actually, there's very recent literature that just came out suggesting that last year, all the trees around the world sequestered close to no carbon. Right, and that.
Sorry, this seems like a very simple question, but I think for the audience out there, it might be on the topic of or might be on the forefront of their brains too. If there were no trees, we as humans,
we can't exist. No.
We can't exist.
No.
Right, because they create oxygen, right?
Yeah, and you know, like phytoplankton and stuff like that play a role.
Know that.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I know. Look. Like anything, right? No question's a dumb question.
No, totally. Like, and it's
there's
like
many people out there that would not realize that if there were zero trees in the planet, we would suffocate to death.
Yep. Yeah. No. We just never would have emerged. We never would have evolved. You know, there's just no possibility for life like this. Now, that's not to say that there weren't all of these other possibilities. Of course there were. There are different ways that things could play out, but you wouldn't have you and I talking right now, you know, intermediated via a satellite. Right? So
thanks, Elon.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. Hard to thank Elon for much, but
hashtag Starlink.
That's maybe a different. Yeah, well, yeah. Gosh, that's a complicated.
Fiber optic. I'm just referring to. Yeah, anything else. So, but yeah, no,
you know,
we could drill into that topic.
But yeah, no. So it's that kind of process, and it's trying to look at the notion of economy and financialization through kind of like a lens of complexity. Very what's called like very wide boundary thinking. And it's really hard because even the way that we computationally model, with the level of sophistication that we have today and the computational resources that we have today, it's only ever a gross approximation of whatever is going on in reality. You know, and there's a lot of issues. Folks may have heard this before, confusing map with territory. Now, in very simple terms, the map is like our scientific theory or whatever it may be. It's a way of us relating to the world. The territory is whatever the real world is. And we can't directly access the real world because we're indirectly accessing, if you will, through sensory perception, all this different type of process. And then when we do science, it's like this multi-perspectival observation and all these different things, right? But so the map is intended to be useful. It's not reality itself. So when we say, hey, when we talk about something like Earth system science, and we talk about the planetary boundaries model, which is a very important thing, probably for everyone to understand, given how consequential it is. Not the nuances of the Earth system science, but just what it is and what it means for us as a species. And a people and a culture and a civilization and all this stuff. So we model what's going on in Earth systems to try and better understand how we are impacting the biosphere so that we can make better decisions about how we might try to come back into some type of harmony with the natural world. But we don't say, hey, the planetary boundaries model is reality itself, is the biosphere. It's just a representation that's designed to be useful for us for some specific purpose. And so when we're trying to think about the value of a tree, we're just trying to develop a really rigorous, really useful approximation. And again, I've seen massively wide-ranging from like a tree's worth 10,000 to a tree could be worth trillions. Like literally, like it's and some of it is wildly speculative. But the reason I picked millions is because of the stuff that I've seen. I think it probably does at least pass the sniff test that's about right-ish.
Right, gotcha. And so, Nathan, so when we're saying, right, we wouldn't be able to survive without trees, how about flowers?
Well,
impact this. So for example, is there, okay, so if there were no trees, but like, let's just hypothetically, there were no trees and just flowers, would we be able to survive or no?
Look, Matt, that is
unique. Is there something so unique happening with the tree that the flower's not providing?
Well, it sort of depends what you mean, because most like flowers come from plants, right? They're flowering plants. If you just mean like a little daisy or something popping up, what I should say very clearly is I actually don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not.
You're not a flora and fauna expert.
Well, no, I'm not. Like, and I obviously have to deal with a lot of this literature in my work, but that's a very specific question. I would assume that if we were just talking about like a rose or something, but even a rose grows on a tree, right? A rose has.
Look, the world needs trustworthy organizations, but the world also needs trustworthy flowers and trees, Nathan.
That's an interesting point. I actually I think these are largely human constructs, and I think that the trees have something like a goal orientation, and in some weird way, trees probably have some like very different form of agency, like a goal-directed behavior. But they're not minded animals like we are, so they don't have. It's not like when we think about goal-directedness and agency, and even what some folks might refer to as freedom of will or whatever. But such a different process for them. But there's some type of goal orientation that they have. It's just it's playing out very differently, and they don't have the capacity for like metacognition or anything like that, at least as far as I'm aware. But then again, like a lot of these areas are so complex and so far beyond my core expertise. It's crazy. So let's ask an apologist.
Gosh, I love this show. Just the array of topics that we can whip through within any given time. It's fantastic. Very, very diverse. I do want to touch back onto the sort of Aboriginal culture, which is quite fascinating. I've done some research too, just as while we're talking. But are you aware of this Holocene interglacial period that happened 11,700 years ago? Which I just did not know.
Yes.
The Aboriginals were isolated on many of the smaller offshore islands of Tasmania when the land was inundated at the start of that Holocene interglacial period. But despite that, the Aboriginal people maintained extensive networks within the continent, and certain groups therefore maintained relationships with the likes of the Torres Strait Islanders and the Makassar people.
So,
Asia, which I find very fascinating. But anyway, the biggest question is, I just want to I think the main topic there is, I guess how we're only the 3-hour plane ride apart from Australia, but yet how we've embraced, I guess, our natives have just been significantly different, right? And they've been far more inclusive and had much more of a voice in our everyday society here in New Zealand, the Māoris, but the Aboriginals have not in Australia. And I haven't done the research here now. I just want to get your opinion on as to potentially why that is.
Oh, mate, it's like, first of all, a few things.
Deep.
One, I'm not a First Nations person.
Correct. So these are all anecdotal opinions that we're having.
Yeah, but well. No, because you're asking why might that be, and that is like that requires an understanding of our historicity, like our historical authenticity or accuracy. And
Correct. Yeah.
you know, so it can't just be anecdote or personal. Well, from my perspective, given the things that I value, I would not approach it that way. But what I would say is, yes,
Right.
I'm not a First Nations person. I'm not a First Nations scholar. My
you say, I see what you're saying there. So
my-
just to understand your brain, you're saying you therefore can't have an anecdotal opinion because you're not First Nation.
well, I'm not saying I can't.
Oh.
What I'm saying is a topic as important as that, as in why are there such stark differences between the treatment of First Nations people and a bunch of other stuff like maintaining language, like real attempts at cultural integration. And this isn't to say that NZ doesn't have a bunch of its own issues, because it absolutely does, and
Sure.
you know, we both know that. But what I'm saying is to thoughtfully comment on something like that, is in why are there those differences. I would only feel comfortable doing that if I was like a scholar of those topics. And even then, I would want to be very careful about how I do it, because I would still be speaking from almost like a colonialist perspective. Now, I don't.
Right. And so is that wholly due to the sensitivity of the topic? And also your utmost respect?
I would say sensitivity. I would say importance, cultural significance, but also the sort of like perspectivism of it. Like, so you know, my parents were both from the UK, and you know, so I have a lot of cultural baggage, much of which I've tried to unpack and make sense of and learn about, based on all of that. So my historical kind of lineage and early upbringing and stuff was informed by that. I only started like really learning about what I think is a better telling of this quote unquote nation state's history once I got into my 20s. Mate, I learned fuck all about this at school. When I was at school, honestly, we did a horrible job of articulating the brutalities and all of the different issues that came with colonialization in this part of the world.
Mate, Nathan, I can only imagine you at school, mate. You would have started teaching the class. The teacher would have let you come up and you would have started running the show.
Do you want to hear? Okay, how old?
Is that accurate? You're about to tell a serious story. You're like, funny enough, actually, my English teacher did tell me to run a class one day.
Well, okay. Let me throw something back to you. How old? And this is just for fun, right? How old do you reckon I was when I first got kicked out of class?
12.
Half that. So,
six.
And the context was this, right? And this sort of framed my relationship to what we call schooling, and I would barely even refer to as education. So I was in a state school, just a normal state school, right? Very kind of average state school on the Gold Coast. Right.
Are your parents academic? Were they super smart as well?
I think mum and dad are both pretty intelligent, but never pursued like academic careers. Like mum when she was young, and you know, different times, right? So when mum and dad, and they've been separated for yonks, but decided to start a family, you know, she did the whole I'm going to stay at home type of thing. But she was she'd gotten into investment banking before that. I'm like, Mum, you would have done very well for yourself if it wasn't for me. In financial sense, I don't think she regrets it though, thankfully. And I'm deeply grateful for you know, the fact that she brought me into this world. But and dad was in risk management and business continuity, and actually very incredible. And he now owns a bar and with my brothers and stuff like that. But
none of them took that sort of philosophical.
No, definitely not. And this was not a thing in our family. It wasn't like just never exposed to this stuff. But anyways, right. So I'm 6 and I'm in a religious education class, right? And the teacher is effectively articulating a fundamentalist Christian sort of ontology and timeline of almost like evolutionary theory. Now, I was really interested in evolution and particularly dinosaurs. But what I did was I put my hand up, because that's what we have to do in order to be able to speak, because we can't self-govern and self-organize like actual, there's all different issues with that. But anyways, put my hand up, and, you know, I'm attended to in a very basic way. And I say, Miss, I'm a bit confused. I'm not quoting verbatim, but this is the general sentiment. Miss, I'm a bit confused. What about, and then I basically rattled off like an evolutionary history, like from going backwards, right? And I think I even used the word amoeba or something like that. I was referring to like a single-celled organism, right? Because I was really I loved all of that stuff. It was amazing. I used to walk around apparently when I was like 5 with my toes up pretending to be a velociraptor. I was like, I'm a dinosaur, right? I am a dinosaur. I'm not a human. Screw that. I'm a dinosaur. So
isn't it just crazy, quite simply, to just think that there were those larger than life animals rolling around many moons ago? I just
totally. A very, very different biospheric context, you know, but yeah. And then instead of engaging with the question, she kicked me out of class. and so that started for me.
Did you go right the way through, Nathan? Did you?
No, I did.
Drop out and just start doing your own thing, or
no? What? I finished year 12, but I dropped out of university.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm a college dropout.
Nice, fantastic.
Maybe around the time of Kanye's college dropout album. I don't know. Obviously, he's a very odd character. So that's stuff.
We could go down rabbit holes there. I'm just glad.
Oh God, I know.
I'm glad you didn't bring up Diddy.
Oh wow, what is wrong? The entertainment industry is fucking horrible.
Well, look. There's a lot to unpack there, but man,
so much.
You think of all that fame, right? And you think it's just an abuse of power and authority, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. Like, and don't get me wrong. There are ideas, philosophical ideas about power corrupts, absolutely. Now, whether that's truly true, I don't know. But man,
are we going to get the list of everyone that went on Epstein's Island? Like you can imagine all of the stars that are just squirming and shaking in their little moon boots, just going.
But you know what? There's been some interesting.
This.
There's been some really interesting stuff. So like 50 Cent. Now, when I grew up, probably my favorite artist when I was really young.
Oh, right? Mate, how good Get Rich Die Trying album, absolutely.
Well, and even the stuff before he got shot was fantastic. Like that guy's so talented.
He really is.
Yeah. Absolutely loved 50 and
hated or love it. Oh, how good was
typically goes by Curtis Jackson nowadays most of the time. But
he was is he actually a really you know more about him allegedly than I do, but was he a really smart individual, was he?
I think he's very cluey. Very cluey.
Very cluey.
You know, and some people get the wrong because the way, you know, he's shot 9 times, right? And one of the times through the lip, and it created a bit of a lisp for him. So I think people, but just listen to his lyrics. Listen to his lyrics back in the day. Like he's wicked smart. And I saw a little clip of him talking about how he never engaged with any of Diddy's stuff because and he's been super vocal. He's even doing a documentary to try and expose more of what Diddy's done. Now, you know, 50 grew up in a really challenging socioeconomic environment and had to do a lot of tough stuff that many of us wouldn't even have to think about to survive, right? But like he clearly had like values that he was operating in relation to, and it sounds like he felt deeply uncomfortable about some of the stuff that was going on and just never engaged. So look, it's going to be fascinating, but you know what, mate? There's almost nothing I think that could come out now about these types of folks that would surprise me. It's utterly horrific, and it's kind of like.
Is it hard to compute for, I guess, us because we have never lived
that sort of lifestyle? Yeah.
So we it's so hard for us to relate.
Totally.
But still, at the end of the day, you still just add on or provide some form of what's the right word? Just normality of thinking or rationale. Sorry, I was trying to think of that word. But some rationale of the choices that they are making, and I guess that's very challenging for us because we haven't been at that level of fame or had that amount of money at our disposal. But I would just hope to think that with my rational brain, I would make better decisions that they've made in the past, and i.e. why they're in the public.
Everyone likes to think that, mate.
That's what I mean. But that's the thing. But that's the thing. It's like anything in life. If you have not experienced it firsthand, you cannot merely have an opinion. You just don't know.
And don't get me wrong.
And all it is just merely public opinion, isn't it?
Yeah, right? Totally.
And not accurate public opinion, because very few, only the top 2% have lived like a Leonardo DiCaprio or a George Clooney or a Diddy.
No. Not 2%, mate. The way that they live is like
1%.
No, 0.0001% is the lifestyle that they have. In terms of privilege, access, socioeconomic status. Like they're in the
okay.
And no, I'm not saying George Clooney and Leo have done anything wrong. Funnily enough,
I wasn't bringing them into.
Yeah, no, totally.
That was actually about. I was just meeting the.
That's a way to get the podcast really popular. Leonardo DiCaprio exposed. George Clooney too.
Yeah.
Start some Reddit conspiracy.
I'm literally going to get done with defamation there, right? Like I've literally looped them in with Diddy. Hey, it's
no, let's not. No one's making those claims.
A-list actors, right? That, like you say, have access and. But
totally.
That's interesting. So you reckon it's a 0.00?
Oh, it's small. It's infinitesimal. It's like these people are in
people in the world.
Yeah, they're in such sort of like, and I use glorified here very loosely, but like glorified air.
Line of their own, hey?
Well, mate, I actually I lived in New York for a while, and I was walking in the Lower East Side one morning, Sunday morning, and no one's out, right? Because it's just not the New York is an evening place, not a morning place. Manhattan particularly, and especially on Sunday morning. Must have been about 9 a.m.
A little bit different up at
beautiful sunny day, and about 200 meters away, I say to my ex-wife now, but wife at the time, I say, oh my God, this like that person is someone, right? And I got to admit, to this day, it was really weird. He and once he was about 30 meters away, and he's when he's out, he's got like his scarf, sort of like, and it was a pretty chilly day, and a little sort of like Peaky Blinders type cap on, Baker Boy sort of cap, and then he's just walking along with one person, just talking to someone. I'm like, oh my God, that's Leonardo DiCaprio. And I felt his presence from like, now I'm not trying to make any metaphysical claims about this, but I swear I felt like a presence from a couple of 100 meters away. It was crazy. I've never had anything like that before.
That's weird, isn't it? Right.
Yeah.
So you're saying, so if I was walking 200 meters away, because I'm not an A-list actor, the presence would not have been felt from you.
Well, I don't know. I think it's almost like
where did that presence come from, or what? That's interesting. Where did that energy come from? And is that just some form of deeper state, universal type energy stratosphere? But what's going on there?
Well, I don't know, and that's why I don't want to make any metaphysical claims. But it's like it's almost like imagine if you could genuinely feel charisma, right? If charisma had like an ontological status, meaning like it was part of the universe somehow. And we could experience that in some way. Now, I'm not making any claims, but that was how I experienced it. It was like I felt that this person is deeply charismatic from literally a couple 100 meters away. And all I could, you can't tell who a person is from that far away. It was like sun was in my eyes and stuff.
Is charisma subjective, or?
It's
so how you would define someone being charismatic might be different to how I define someone.
Yes, I'd say it's
is there an overall arcing body of it, the definition of charismatic? Just there's some core principles that they need to adhere to become charismatic, or
we might try and define it that way, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is that way. Again, that's a map, not necessarily the territory. So what is charisma? Don't really know, but we have lots of ways of trying to define it. So we have lots of maps. Now, I would say it's more transjective.
Right. Isn't it quite simply just making someone feel very comfortable and albeit also laugh at the same time? No?
I don't know the definition off the top of my head. I would say there are a number of sort of qualities or characteristics that are exhibited consistently in a person. And we call that collective of characteristics that are consistently exhibited charisma. And it's kind of like like an appropriate confidence. It's kind of like, yeah, it's making people feel comfortable. It's being interesting and interested. You know, it's probably lots of stuff, but I would say it's
Would your peers describe you as charismatic?
My parents
Your peers.
or peers.
Sorry. I should speak Australian. Sorry, mate. Your peers.
My peers.
Yeah. Your peers. Your parents. Yeah, like I can talk like an Australian pretty easily, mate.
Pretty easily, and I can say fish and chips too. So, oh, mate, I don't know. I actually look. I would think sometimes I would be thought to be charismatic, but I think it's transjective, right? So it's between the sort of agent and arena, and you know the like it's between relations, like it's not necessarily objective subject.
Sorry, what's the difference between subjective and transjective?
Well, so this is interesting because there is a historical lineage to this. Like objective and subjective didn't used to mean what they now mean. So what we're sort of talking about when we say objectivity is like observer independence. But what the fuck does that even mean? Because everything is observer dependent to some extent, right? Because we know this because of observer effects and stuff like that. But basically we're saying, let's pick, it's always easier to use examples, right? Than talking about these fancy sort of concepts. So
you'd make a great politician, by the way.
Well, I don't know if that's a terrible insult or
no,
you are a shit person. No, you should go into politics.
I meant that in utmost respect.
Thanks, mate. Well, I appreciate that. Another funny story. Can I? Okay, all right. I'm going to come.
You know why I reference that, eh?
Yeah,
you can bounce around 3 different topics and be so articulated around 3, but yet probably never conclude or answer the direct question. But that's fine, and that's what makes it a beautiful conversation.
Mate, life is process. Conversation is process. There is no answer, but we can engage in the practice of answering. Right?
Yeah. Like my past guest, John Key, who was the Prime Minister of New Zealand, I would love to just FaceTime him into this conversation. We have a very elaborative 3-way, so to speak. Don't take that out of context.
Yeah, no, please don't. But
it would be such a fantastic conversation. Because he does the same thing, and which makes it so great as me being the interviewer for my interviewees that do bounce. It just keeps people on their toes. It's exciting, it's invigorative, and it's fantastic. So,
mate, it's dialogical, it's living process, right? We're going on a journey together. So,
we didn't plan this at all, and that's what's so naturally beautiful about it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, conversations are emergent, right? You bring 2 people together. You have some enabling conditions, and then stuff comes out of that you could not have predicted, right? Just based on the individual parts.
Correct. And you must find that extremely frustrating with an ADHD brain like mine, that I just throw out the most random question that's completely irrelevant to the topic at hand, and you go, "Where are we going now?" But I love it. You just take it and run with it.
It's kind of it's fun. It's fun because you can obviously do the reductionist sort of thing if you want, and that sometimes that's really necessary. I just want a simple answer, and that's what I'm looking for, and you can give a simple answer, right? So you could say,
no, I find those very boring, and that's why the value of the show. I like to unpack it deeply. And fair enough.
And
that's what you do very well.
Let me answer objective, subjective, transjective in just a sec. But so when I was like 6 months old, I was born in Northern Territory, right? Mum was walking a pram, and a lady came up to her very sort of like almost like mystically and said, "Oh my God, your son's going to be the Prime Minister one day."
Wow.
Like very convincing. And my mum was just like blown away, like, what the hell's going on here? And the lady just sort of like shimmered into her life and then faded out, you know, like it was like this really, anyways, push that to the side. So objective, we're talking about sort of like observer independence, but that gets really messy. So let's just say something like the phenomenology of the moon. Like even if I'm not looking at the moon still exists. We kind of mean something like that. Subjective, we're talking about kind of like our first person experience, something that only we can really know. Like you know, and then transjective tends to be kind of like the meaning derived from relations that can only be derived sort of between, you know, like parts interacting. And so I would say charisma, or the charismatic nature / function, whatever that is more transjective. It's between agent, arena, or different agents and the context that they're in. I think it'd be very hard to claim that something like charisma is quote unquote objective, because you're talking about a subject and the way that that subject expresses themselves and the way that other subjects interpret the way that that subject is expressing themselves within an environmental context that we share but have different perspectives on. So it's probably more transjective or something like that.
Right. Very fascinating, isn't it? Well, even that word, based on interpretation versus an actual definitive, like the meaning of a word, the meaning of a person, but then everyone around who's had their own unique experience having their own unique way of interpreting that.
Yep.
Right. So therefore, very challenging to get to something quite factual.
Yeah, well, and this is, and so we have different types of knowledge, right? So a lot of people get so propositional knowledge is sort of like about facts, beliefs, systems of justification, but we also have procedural, perspectival, and participatory ways of knowing or forms of knowledge. And I'll send you something after we finish that I think will be really useful, and maybe you attach that to the show notes. It's like a 15-minute synthesis of a bunch of lectures from a cognitive scientist and cognitive psychologist and professor of Buddhist psychology at the University of Toronto.
Right.
Incredible mind, really great contributor. And I've met him once. He's really a really nice person as well. Dr. John Vervaeke. I think people will find that fascinating, because often when we think about knowledge, we're just thinking about the propositional. Where it's like Luke is 191 centimeters. I don't know how tall you are, however tall you are, right? Like it's a fact, it's a proposition, right? But then if I were to say
he's obese, because that would also be quite
that could be propositional depending on how we frame it. But
doctors try and say, right, you are obese if you are over X amount, or have more like body composition, because BMI is not helpful, because you could be tall, or let's say you're short but really muscly, but your your cardiovascular or cardiometabolic health is amazing, right? You're not obese. That your BMI might be through the roof, and then if so it's just the wrong. BMI can be used in certain ways usefully, but not in others usefully. Right.
So but then I could say something like, well, Luke's really good at tying his shoes. That's not a fact. It's not a proposition, right? It's basically a claim about the quality of your procedural knowledge in a particular context.
It's pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate. I am pretty good on my shoes, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So, but I'll share a resource, and then folks can check that out. It's a wonderful description of these lost ways of knowing, these other 3 Ps, because we've become very good with the propositional stuff, but we've kind of forgotten these other ways of knowing that are really important to our being in this world and our ability to sort of cultivate our character, cultivate wisdom, and then cultivate collective wisdom, such that we, wisely steward our power for the benefit of the many.
Right. So on the obese and overweight topic, when someone would stipulate and say they're overweight or they're obese, are they referring to the cohort of individuals that have an average weight for their age group and their gender, or where is that comment coming from, and what actually quite intently defines
again,
overweight? How are they getting to that word?
As with
like you and I are obviously not obese and not overweight, but but why is that? Is that because we aren't weighing over a certain amount, or
well, that would say, given what the word implies, and I actually don't know its etymology.
True. That's a good point. Overweight. Over what weight?
Well, and actually, so this, so first of all, I'm not a metabolic health expert.
No, of course not. No. We all know that, mate. The questions I'm asking are merely your own opinions.
Well, I have to do this though. It's actually really important. And one of the problems that we have in society now is people talk out their ass and I'm going to say this very confidently and assertively, and I'm okay with that. People talk out their ass about stuff that they actually have no intimate knowledge of. And the problem is, do you know what I mean? And then they're given, they're platformed, and people give credence to what they're suggesting, and it's harmful.
Yeah, it is very hard. No, I love it. I love it that you do that at the start of when you talk. And no, it's fantastic, because all you're merely saying, and Joe Rogan does it all the time. He's like, I'm not the expert on this, but then he like we all know as humans, we're all allowed an opinion on it, but you stipulate quite simply, look, I'm not the subject matter expert on this.
But when it comes to, so there's different things that we're paying attention to. So there are certain physiological characteristics, right? Like we can look at your body composition, right? The percentage of lean mass versus non-lean mass, basically, right? The ratio of lean mass to non-lean mass. And that often correlates with other cardiometabolic indicators, right? All different types of stuff. But like when it comes to the quality of one's health and the adaptivity that affords an individual, in this life world, it's definitely way more complex and nuanced than BMI or some, assertion at a population level of which sort of category you fit into. Now, they're often correlated, right? Again, if someone's overweight, it tends to mean that relative to their height, age, yada, 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 like they're in this category, and that tends to be associated with like sort of suboptimal cardiometabolic health, probably for these kind of reasons. But again, it's kind of like there's a difference when we're doing like epidemiological stuff or population stuff, which is really important when we're doing health policy and these types of things. And then actually a clinical context, consultative context, where a doctor or a clinician of whatever kind of dietitian, etc., a clinical dietitian, would be providing like tangible advice to the individual. So they draw on the population stuff, the things that we think we understand about large groups of people over time, and then they've got to contextually apply it. So
right. No, very good explanation there. I just want to pivot over to like literally your wheelhouse, right? Because for over a decade, you've helped design trustworthy organizations that benefit by doing real good for people and planet. Look, Nathan, I mean, you've worked with some very big organizations, Microsoft, Autodesk, Telefonica, IAG, TELUS, the Ethics Center, the list goes on. You've really work with some extremely large organizations, like I said. But what's been a huge common trend that you've found over that time of dealing with so many big organizations, dealing with many different people and personality traits within these organizations? But what's been just a common theme or trend that you've found and you've just taken away as really key insights and learnings for not only yourself, but from a business perspective?
About working.
Well, just some of those aha moments, or being like, that's so fascinating. The reason, between Microsoft and IAG, there were just common trends and themes. There were, surely there must be, because you've dealt with such a wide array.
Yeah, totally. There's definitely
kind of makes sense. It was a bit sort of
no. There's trends and patterns and stuff, mate. I'm just going to ask though, can I nip to the bathroom really quickly?
Sure,
and then, and
sure,
I'll
take the same approach. Yeah. Okay.
Amazing.
Yeah,
and then we'll come back and we'll tackle that question properly.
Perfect. Sounds
Cheers,
good.
Mate.
Sounds good. Whoop to a commercial proudly sponsored by Starbucks in conjunction with Tim Hortons, where your coffee is better than people itself. Thank you. Welcome to the Luke Farr Show, a show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. Welcome to the Starbucks coffee ad, proudly sponsored by Tim Hortons, ironically. Welcome to the Starbucks commercial, proudly sponsored by Tim Hortons in Canada. Nathan, great to have you back. Sorry, I was just doing sort of test reruns of commercials that I could input here, but sadly failed miserably. But nonetheless, it was a great time being alone.
That's all good, mate. So let's tackle that question. So what are the patterns, trends, commonalities, maybe differences working with all of these organizations? So look, non-extensively, they're all kind of wrapped up in the same paradigm, right? So if it's a corporation, we talked about this last time, maximize capital accumulation or, you know, whatever, increase shareholder value, narrow goal orientation.
Right.
All of them have that. A little bit different. You're working with the public service, of course, although they're kind of still wrapped up in this neoliberal paradigm, which makes it tough in certain ways. Again, research institution or whatever, non-profit, it's slightly different context. But if it's a corporation...
When you mean neoliberal, are you referring to more left-wing orientated?
No.
No.
So neoliberalism is a particular sort of ideology of political economy, if you will.
Right.
That became very prominent in the sort of Reagan-Thatcher era.
Right. Weirdly, I just associate neoliberalism with socialism, but no.
No. Oh, actually, really different.
Absolute polar opposite.
Different. Yeah. So
right.
Neoliberalism
okay.
has really given rise to the rampant corporatism that we have now. The world's kind of run by corporations in a lot of ways. You know, they're really the most powerful institutions in a lot of ways. And you know, lots of different ideas. Like it builds upon other historical ideas, but you know, premises like
closer to right wing then, rather than
yeah, like you know, minimize government involvement, small governments, big businesses, maximize the freedom of those businesses to operate.
Right,
those different types of things.
Privatization.
Totally, yeah.
Right, gotcha.
And yeah, and it's been sort of like the prevailing, you know, ideology for sort of like 4 decades or so.
Right.
And yeah, and so they're all sort of stuck within that paradigm. You know, and then we're stuck in this paradigm of growthism. So nothing grows forever, even the universe. But we seem to think that companies can grow forever, or our macro economy can grow forever. It's bullshit. It can't. You know,
so that's interesting to unpack. So the planet will die at a certain time.
Absolutely, yeah.
When?
Well, it's hard to know, but it'll like we could get hit by an asteroid, or there could be a super volcano eruption or a solar flare or something like that could kill life. But the planet will be consumed by the sun effectively as the sun expands. But we don't have to worry about that, mate. It's at least 1 billion years off. So
that's what I was thinking. I'm sure in the dinosaur era they were going, mate, this planet ain't going to be around another 1,000 years.
No.
We have been, and so, when that's a very fascinating topic. Yeah, when will it? Like, does it actually? Yeah, is it just literally based on the law of physics?
Well, yeah.
The sun will get so close to the Earth it'll just implode.
Yeah, and there's not one law of physics, but it's like we can describe it with different physical laws and the mathematical representations. But it's more like when it comes to economy and Earth systems are like intimately linked, right? So GDP and environmental degradation look like this. It's like dose sort of linear relationship, and they're somewhere between 99 and almost 100% correlated. So as we grow the economy, we also destroy the environment. But what's crazy about that, we're eating our own future lunch by being obsessed with economic growth rather than economic sufficiency, which is very different and very important. Now, that doesn't mean
very selfish approach, isn't it?
What it is in some ways, yeah. Well, no, look, it is.
Well, because we're not exactly sort of planning for the success and
No, we're
greater
not.
outcomes
No,
for the
absolutely.
next 2,000 years.
No,
we're looking
not
at the success just very much into
right now. This quarter, this year, maximize capital accumulation in that period, and with some crazy ideological stance that we can keep doing that. But the problem is, in order to keep growing economy, we need the environment, we need the natural world, we need the material throughput that affords. Now, that's not just like, there are all different crazy ideas for how we can sufficiently absolutely decouple, like, you know, crazy sort of metaverse ideas and things like this, right? Ready Player One type stuff. But like, if we're just grounding in where we are today, best available balance of particularly propositional knowledge about how we're tracking and all that type of stuff, our transgression of planetary boundaries, the period of planetary instability that we have well and truly entered.
What type of planet, Nathan, would you like to see in the next 50 years?
Well, it's going to get a lot worse before there's any possibility of it getting better. That's guaranteed. There's pretty much nothing that we can do now to avoid that. What I would like to see, though, is a deep recognition of what we've actually done historically and owning up to the fucking consequences of that. Stop doing what's called the ostrich effect, burying our heads in the sand because it's confronting.
What's the ostrich effect for anyone out there that doesn't know?
So basically all that means is when we're met with deeply confronting information, instead of interfacing with it and attempting to metabolize and integrate it, we literally, like, we run away from it. Like, we bury our head in the sand. No, I'm not, no, that's too, you know what I mean?
Right. Gotcha.
And they're very common, particularly nowadays in, you know, tribalism, identity politics, information warfare, yada, yada, yada.
Right. Effectively ignorance.
Yeah, but it's like it's like a willful ignorance. You know what I mean? It's like, no, I don't want to know that. Boom. Too hard to deal with. Boom. Which I think is a failure of, like, you know, the prefrontal cortex in evolutionary terms is what really differentiates us from other hominids, great apes, yada, yada, yada. And incredibly powerful faculty that we haven't really learned how to use properly yet. And our success as a species is probably largely going to depend on whether we are able to effectively utilize that reasonably recent, you know, evolutionary adaptation.
You mentioned prefrontal cortex. Is that true that develops completely by the age of 22, approximately?
I think it's a little bit, I think it's supposed to be a little bit later. We have sort of like full physiological brain development around 25 or so.
Like when you're talking about our fully developed adult brain, right?
Well, yeah, but it's interesting because it's a little bit of a misnomer. So, because our brain, if you think about neural connections, and therefore the way that our brain functions and the way that affords cognitive function and stuff like that, that just keeps happening, right? We're becoming increasingly complex. We can become increasingly complex, open, aware, curious, cognitively adaptive, etc., as we keep getting older. But the proposition there is more like physiological, like core physiological development.
Right. Gotcha. So when they're talking about, when you're going to sit with your psychologist and they're talking about all of that sort of past trauma that happened at a very young age, up until the age of 18. That's been programmed into us and deeply embedded in the subconscious. But is that why it's just so challenging to rewire the brain? Because of the fact that our brain hasn't developed to the or fully developed our prefrontal cortex. So therefore it's like, you know, when they talk about childhood traumas, right? It's like all of, like, okay, contrary to that would be anyone that's dealing with any trauma from the age of 30 onwards seems to be a little bit easier to overcome, right?
Yeah, you can be more, you should be more able to kind of like move through that process fairly adaptively. But it's actually a pretty complex area, because brain states, as in neural correlates, aren't necessarily the necessary and sufficient cause of mind, like our mindedness, right? So but I'll push to the side a lot of that complexity.
Yeah, let's just do a simple scenario, right, about your younger brain versus my younger brain. Like we both would have quite simply grown up in very different environments with dealing with many different people, right? So therefore our brains fundamentally are going to be developed in a significantly different way, right?
Yeah, different physiology. So we have a different starting point, like our genes are different. We also have a different sort of like agent arena context. Our environment is different. We also have different experiences, which mean that sort of like our, you know, synaptic pathways, neural pathways, yada, 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 are going to be different. Which means that if you put us in the same situation right now, we're going to deal with it differently in terms of exterior and interior. You know, so it's going to look different to an external observer, if you will, but it's going to feel different to us as well. Yeah, and look, like the early childhood stuff is tough, because you know, again, a lot of that, it's like what I was talking about, the trauma stuff. So trauma is not the event itself, but rather the organism's response to event or circumstance. You know, we have limited faculties, you know, like, and you could look at it in terms of like fMRI, like you'd have probably a lot of like amygdala action, but not a lot of like, you know, like prefrontal cortex. Like we just don't have those same abilities when we're really young, but we also have less physiological power and prowess. And so it's really multifactorial kind of like thing. And then there's all of like the different perspectives. You could take a Jungian sort of take, or a Freudian sort of take, or a, like, you know, or you could just say, psychoanalysis sucks. So like, you know, I don't know. It depends on lots of different factors. And again, guess what? Way beyond my direct expertise.
Yeah. Thank you for the caveat there, Nathan. The audience is well aware by now. I love that.
But
it's not in my wheelhouse. However, here's my thought process.
Here's a couple of, you know, a few pinches of salt. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah, but then, so, you know, so coming back, just to not do the politician thing, so coming back to the organizations, right?
Oh, nice little dig on me. Yeah, that's good from you. Very good. Circles back. You enjoy that small little dig. No, well, thank you very much for doing that, Nate. It's very mindful of you.
So, you know, so they're all wrapped in the same paradigm, right? But then there are other patterns that are actually quite positive. Like in all of these organizations, you have good people who are there because they think they can do something good, who care about doing something good, who, when they go home at the end of the day, want to feel good about the work that they do. Now, that's not often the case for all of these different reasons, like various system constraints. But so you have these tensions, right? You have like the tension of the system, the direction the system wants to go in, and then the direction that people want to go in. And there's often a lot of dissonance. There's a big gap. There's a divide. There's moral dissonance, right? Because the values that people have are not necessarily the values that corporations have, because the one true value, corporations are like Sauron, right? The one true value is maximize shareholder returns, if you will. Whereas people have more nuanced values. They're like, fuck, I care about the health of the biosphere because I have kids or grandkids, or I just want life to continue. Whereas a corporation doesn't actually want life to continue. That's not a value that it's instantiated or embodied or operationalized. Now, the people within the corporation, obviously, right. So there are those things. There's this tension. And then there are lots of other things. There's sunk cost fallacy. All organizations have sunk cost fallacy to some extent. They keep going in a direction that they shouldn't, that's irrational, illogical, harmful, whatever, just because they're going in that direction, right? And there's a stuckness. All organizations struggle with change and adaptation in different ways. Most organizations talk about themselves as being kind of like mechanistic, hierarchical, etc., but they don't recognize they're more organismic. You know, they're a bunch of interconnected networks. An organization gets mapped out.
What do you mean by organismic exactly? I got my interpretation on, but it just
yeah. So organisms and machines, like a living thing.
Sorry, right.
Yeah. So I mean,
I
they're more.
thought it was more referencing to an organization. No, it's just a different way of phrasing organism.
Yeah. So we often think about like we're talking about the machinery of the corporation. Corporations aren't machines. They're more like complex adaptive systems. They're much more like an organism than they are like a machine. But we treat them like machines because of the hang-ups of scientific management and all this stuff. Interestingly, though, the first ever organizational map that I'm aware of, you know how we see like org charts and they just look like just this basic like static sort of diagram. It's like, you know, shareholders, board, CEO, executives.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just down.
Looks like the food triangle. Yeah.
Totally. Whereas the first ever org chart that I'm aware of actually look, and I'll dig it out. Actually, do I have it somewhere here? You know what? If I do, this will be epic.
Sorry, did you say here or here? Here.
Here.
I miss that Australian accent.
Let me see if I can share. Can I share?
Looks like we're going to another break, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the commercial for Cadbury.
Window. Yeah, here you go. Look, I'm going to share this. Watch this. Watch this, people. Can you see this?
Are we sharing screens now? The Luke Farr show is getting very dynamic and interactive.
Can you see this?
Yes, correct.
So this is from, you know, New York Railroad. Look, so that's an org chart.
That to me looks like someone's brain when they're on ayahuasca.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit like you can think about the it's a bit like a neural network, but it's also like a mycorrhizal network, right? Like the networks that you know that are part of forest ecologies and that, you know, that sit below sort of like the fruiting body, which is the mushroom.
Correct.
And this is more. It was really interesting. This is from the 1800s, right? This is more how.
So you're going to start talking about psilocybin there for a second.
Well, we could do that as well, but you know, but how fascinating is this, right? Like this is from an era where we think, oh, we were quite basic at the time, and we were beginning the Industrial Revolution and really ramping it up, and we became obsessed with fossil fuels and all this stuff, right? And we were really beginning to like instantiate capitalism and all this type of stuff. But what a beautiful diagrammatic representation of the complexity of this network of networks that's actually an organization. And you know, like, you know, a bank actually works much more like this. It doesn't represent itself like this. It thinks of itself more computationally or mechanistically or with a sort of within a reductionist paradigm, but it's much more complex and it's more like an organism than it is like a machine, which is weird because it treats itself more like a machine than an organism. And so that's an interesting hang up within most organizations as well. And what that means is they're almost like fighting their own reality in some ways, and it creates a lot of like sometimes explicit but a lot of implicit tension. And what it does is it makes the organization far less adaptive and resilient and capable of evolving, right? Because it wants to kind of stay the same-ish. Like its purpose for changing is just so that it can make more money. Its purpose for change is not you know, like more like sort of like autopoietic, like self-making or like evolutionary.
I'm picking up what you're putting down for sure. Hey, Nathan, I'm just going to switch gears there just a little bit. And I find it very curious, but it is still pertinent to what you're talking about. How do you personally define the word ego? And then also, how would you define when someone says they're having an ego death?
I don't know.
Why do you laugh at that first and foremost?
Because
why was that your immediate reaction?
Because I know where you're going. So we're getting into psychedelic territory.
Right now, because you were thinking, right? He mentioned psilocybin, and he's going to
totally. Well, you've mentioned
asking about ego.
Your brain's on ayahuasca, psilocybin, ego death. I know the direction that we're going. So.
But we started way back with First Nations. I love it.
Yeah.
It's just so great.
Wow.
Conversation is phenomenal.
It seems like you know, you can smoke. Well, I think I can say this. You know, you can smoke DMT from the.
You can say anything on the show, mate.
So the acacia plant, right, which is part of our national emblem, has seemingly been quite important to First Nations people in this part of the world for various different reasons. Again, I'm not going to get into that territory because I'm all of the caveats that I provided before, but you can actually smoke DMT, which is a different delivery mechanism to the ayahuasca brew. And quite a lot of people do that. Not that I know anyone that's done that, but
stop being so PC. I want your true, authentic self, Nathan Kinch.
well, you know what? No, my true, authentic self can take the piss, and
Correct.
that's what I'm doing. Right? So
I'm sure you can. You're your own independent agent now. You're not tied to an organization with.
I'm not, and so I can definitely play in, around, and beyond the edges. Thankfully,
that's all. Isn't that so comforting? Oh.
But it's also scary because there's this sense of safety that people have, particularly like you think about now, it's not real. It's a perceived sense of safety when you have like a cushy job or whatever. You're getting paid every week. I've never had that really in my life. You can't now. You can also get fired.
Have you always been out on your own, relying on a contract?
Yeah. So I've never I've had a couple of very short stints. I was once hired as a professional CEO, lasted 8 weeks, various different reasons. And then very early in my career, I had a couple of short stints, a few months, kind of on an actual full-time employment contract. But that's been it.
Right.
Okay. So ego, right? There are different conceptions of ego. In the West, we often think of ego as like being like an inflated sense of self, and then you getting into bordering on, narcissism and these types of things. In the East, they've had very different conceptions of ego. It's more relating to kind of like self-narrative and the construction of self, the feeling that we have of self. There are also, and then, there's a sort of Freudian type perspective, but I would say that the ego is sort of like one facet of what we think of as our self. And there are many different attempts to describe what that phenomena is. And is I really quite like, there's a sort of like meta theorist and clinician. His name's Dr. Greg Enriquez. I actually have I reckon you'd love this. Give me a sec. His new book here. I haven't started reading it yet, but I'm quite familiar with a lot of his work.
Is that a Casio, old school Casio watch I just saw on your hand?
No.
No, it's not. But gosh, it's right up my alley though. Show us the watch. Just give us a quick little flex on the watch.
No. Can you see that?
Very nice. Right. Yeah. Sorry. How dare I insult you?
Sorry.
It's a little bit different than the Casio, but the shape was quite. Anyway, it's very lean.
Yeah. So,
no,
we can talk about sartorial stuff. This was bought like long before I had a child, and when I was in a different phase of life.
That's gangster. No, I can tell you listen to 50 Cent for sure.
Yeah. But he's got some absolutely, he does like very meta-theoretical work on philosophy of science, philosophy of mind, but also very, very powerful stuff to try and integrate the fractured discipline of the psychological sciences. And Greg's work on describing these conceptions of self, like the inner self, the narrating self, and then the public self and stuff, like really fascinating. So I would refer folks to that. I think that's a really great resource. And then when we say ego death, we're sort of talking about almost like different things, but it's something like the phenomenology or the phenomena we experience, often mediated by some type of entheogen or psychedelic compound, but not always. Some people can experience, advanced meditators claim that they experience this, and I think they're claiming this correctly. I've never experienced proper ego death I've experienced moments of ego disillusionment from like pure consciousness events. Sometimes they're referred to as through meditation.
Sorry to interrupt you. Is ego quite simply the interior view of one's self-importance? Would that be?
I still think that's leaning towards that quite Western sense that I was describing about ego being this inflated sense of self-importance, which relates to characteristics and stuff like narcissism.
Right.
But no, I haven't related to ego that way. Like when most people talk about ego, I think they're kind of just talking about the sense that we have that there's a self almost like in our head, right? This is a quite a common experience. Like there's a like a little Nate in Nate's head type of thing. And I don't think that's actually how it works.
Right.
But I think that's sort of what people are talking about. And then under certain conditions, that can fade away. And it's like you have a pure experience. So there's not, you're not relating to experience. You're not narrating the experience to yourself as self to yourself. It's kind of like you are experience. You are equal to experience.
Gotcha.
Something like that is
narcissism classified as a disease?
Look, I don't know. There is, yeah, there's this whole taxonomy within the psychological sciences of all of this stuff, and there's like basically like a standard. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but
I have looked through it. I looked at literally the 9 traits of narcissism, and I mean, I found it quite baffling. I thought, wow. I mean, geez, I read and I go, I've got 3 of those.
Yeah, and that's
I'm sure we all have layers of it too, don't we?
Totally. And this is, yeah, and there's an interesting. Again, I don't quite know, and it's way beyond my sort of skill set and the collective of my experience. But I think there are real risks with over pathologizing and over diagnosing. When psychosocial disorders or dysfunction within a kind of like reductionist biomedical type paradigm, which isn't necessarily all that the psychological sciences relies on, of course, but I think there are risks with that. And there's also, like, think of something like when we talk about neurodivergence. Well, if neurodivergence is much more like a spectrum, if anything, and it's probably not a linear spectrum, it's more like an n-dimensional hyperspace. It's more multifactorial, and we all exist somewhere within that space, whatever it is. So but there's even like, again, beyond my sort of pay grade, if you will, in that colloquial sense. But I think there are we're headed in an interesting direction there. And I'm not sure whether it's going to end up leading to something that's overall helpful and adaptive, or leading us into more precarious territory. I'm not quite sure.
No. Fantastic. Great insights for sure. Very interesting. Right. Hey, Nathan Kinch, I think that's all we've got time for today. We've actually gone a little bit over time, but nonetheless, a phenomenal conversation. And I always enjoy having you on the show. We literally delve, we pivot, we go so deep on a variety of topics. And I really do want to thank you for your time today. Thank you, Nathan Kinch, for coming on the Luke Farr Show, show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. Thank you, Concept.
Thanks for having me, Luke.
I'll just hit stop record.